Well, we have been taking our time in the book of Matthew. And in recent weeks, we've been focusing on the bedrock teachings for apprentices of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount. And within it, Jesus is teaching us a new way to be human. And then he describes what that even actually means through several case studies. So far, we've looked at 4 different case studies that we've covered. We have talked about murder, adultery, divorce, and truth-telling. And today we're going to look at the 5th case study, and then next week we'll close it up. Brian's going to hit a home run for us there. So thanks, Brian. And throughout all of these, Jesus quotes from the laws of the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, teaching his followers the ethical wisdom found within and beyond the letters of the law. These laws are certainly profound, and they can even still guide us today. But to guide us well, the ancient cultural context, it really, really matters in these case studies. We often see how the context of scriptures can kind of help us to have a deeper understanding. But this particular text certainly brings depth, but it also challenge, and you may even find some surprise as well in there. So if you have your Bible, would you please turn in it with me to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5. If you don't have a Bible and you'd like one, feel free to raise your hand. Someone can definitely bring you one here for the front as well. So we're going to be starting in verse 38. And when you've located that in your Bible, if you would, please stand with me for the reading of Scripture. So this is Matthew 5, 38 through 42. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him also the other. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. You can be seated. Thanks. So here, Jesus begins with, you have heard it said, with some kind of law or quotation or summary of one of the commands of the Torah, or people's interpretation of it even. And there are 3 places that this phrase or example is used: in Exodus 21, in Leviticus 24, and Deuteronomy 19. You can snapshot that or write it down. Might be nice to peruse those later. But in all of them, one person has wronged another, and it lists a set of items. If someone is injured, someone is hurt, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, wound for wound, burn for burn, bruise for bruise. Leviticus even adds fracture for fracture. Notice it goes from life, so this kind of big category, to key parts of the face, then to the hands and the feet, and then to injuries. So an eye for an eye seems like more of an abbreviation for the whole entire concept. And this law is stated 3 times in the Torah and is called the law of retaliation, which was known by a Latin name, lex talionis. And this could easily sound kind of vengeful. This law was ancient to Jesus, of course, because it was in the Torah, but also even before the time of Moses, which is kind of fascinating. There were Near Eastern law codes that existed that depicted these types of phrases and principles. The earliest written record of it dates back to a Babylon king named Hammurabi. And it was said that he brought this offering to a sun god and received these laws and this kind of hidden wisdom that later became called the Hammurabi Code. And among them are a number of statements such that are also very similar to this. It says, if a lord has destroyed the eye of a member of a ruling class, then they will destroy his eye. If a lord has broken the bone of the Lord, then they will break out his rink. Break his bone, not rink. If a lord knocks out the tooth of another lord in his own rink, then they will knock out his tooth. A well-known Jewish scholar wrote in a commentary on Exodus that prior to Hammurabi, it was actually monetary compensation that was the rule for bodily injury. So you assign a value to, say, like your eye, and then you pay them that amount of money. And we see this similarly in our country, in our judicial system. If I'm going to sue somebody, then I'm determining a value that I'm placing on the harm or the wrong that they've done to me, and I'm not exactly allowed to just simply do back to them what they did to me. And honestly, what does that really solve? But then they will pay for that wrong. Main point being, this can sound like maybe it's a license to get even. Yet what this law actually is attempting to do is to put a ceiling on vengeance getting out of control, to prevent the escalation of the recompense, to stop or put a cap somehow on human violence. The law was trying to address two problems that can often come up, which are getting even, but then you kind of overcompensate, you like add a little too, you go too far, or the escalation of harm or trauma that continues and perpetuates generationally. If you think of stories in history or movies depicting dynamics within subcultures, or our daily life and what's happening in our world, you could think about, Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. It's like one thing goes wrong, and the next thing you know, you have a family blood feud on your hands, and it just keeps carrying on. What about The Godfather or anything mafia? It's brutal, they're making people pay, and there's no mercy there. It's a system to put a stop, though, so that things don't spiral out of control. This rule was really meant to ensure that recompense that was due actually matched the scale of the wrong when it was done. So as we talk about this, we could even wonder, well, are vengeance and justice the same? The assumption is like, okay, you poked my eye, so I guess I'll poke out yours. But it doesn't really seem like the system was actually applied this way. It seems like what it was saying was, what's the monetary value that you've suffered? And to make it right is paying for that, and that being just recompense. The English word revenge or retaliation that we can throw around, it can seem like making it right, but we're always kind of pushing those limits and adding more to it, which often sounds like making you pay, and out of my own dysregulated determination of what that even is, which then just puts you past justice, and it leads to escalation, hence the Godfather. This law can sound brutal. However, it was actually meant to counter our impulse for revenge. This can sound like maybe license to get even, yet its intent was to help create that ceiling on vengeance getting out of control. At the heart of this law is saying that, humans are not that good at exacting justice. Yet injustice is all around us. It could also be easy to think that this wisdom is somehow teaching a passive response to, say, like a perpetrator, and just allowing them to do harm to you. But what we'll find are 3 different scenarios in Scripture given that are anything but passive. What exists here for us to take in and apply is how to boldly stand against injustice in creative, non-violent ways. Jesus' response to this was interesting. If we think the law was originally saying that it was giving a license, then his response feels like a true counter, saying the opposite of that. If what the law was intended to do was just create a level set on the amount that you can demand for recompense for damages, then it's saying you can't demand more than what is reasonable. The command wasn't that you have to demand recompense for what was done wrong. It was simply saying that if you're going to do it, you have to do it rightly and do not demand more than that. There's a serious reality that the Hebrew Bible highlights, which is that humans are very imperfect when it comes to balancing recompense and doing that well. There's a theme where the Israelites are called at different points to not demand recompense or retaliate, but instead to trust God and allow Him to be the ultimate judge. Deuteronomy 32 says, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay." In Psalm 94, David is lamenting about awful things that people are doing, and he says, "Yahweh is the God who will bring recompense or avenge." Man, what about when David comes across Saul in a cave after Saul tried to kill him, and he doesn't kill him when he could totally take him out? He says, "May Yahweh avenge the wrongs you've done to me. I won't touch you." It's saying God will be a better judge than I will. Paul says in Romans 12, "Don't take revenge, God will repay." It's as if God is saying, don't try to decide what your own recompense should be. So there's that. Jesus quotes the law, "Do not resist an evildoer," to say, okay, I'm just going to let God deal with it and I don't have to do anything. That can sound so passive. Can we just acknowledge that? It might kind of swing the other way. And this is after something actually has happened to you, like you're already hurt. And I'm just going to let you keep doing that. I'm not going to try to make it stop. Like, what is he saying? He doesn't mean don't do anything. He doesn't mean what happened to keep happening to you. This is not what Jesus is saying. What's really tragic is that there's a lot of people, probably that I know some, who've been communicated to that turning the other cheek means enduring abuse and harm and staying because that's the conclusion they've drawn from this text. And that's really sad. This has been used to further harm and oppress people, which is really grievous. And partly why it's happened is because we're just reading it in our English translations. So we haven't looked to really understand what it meant in Jesus' language. And then something like this can get used in a way that furthers harming people. So we're going to be looking at some Greek phrases here, along with the 3 examples that Jesus gives, so we can really understand it at a deeper place. And each example that Jesus gives includes a response, and none involve doing nothing. So if you're thinking that, you can just take a sigh of relief. He's not saying this. When you read them in English, it can kind of sound like be a doormat, but the ancient cultural context is everything here to understand what he's actually saying. So here, Jesus is using a pun. that connects his response when he says, don't resist, with the law that he's mentioning, the law of retribution. So he's saying an eye for an eye. That word for in the Greek is a preposition, anti, and it means the thing that matches or the same degree, same in kind, or level. When he says don't resist, resist is a compound Greek word, so there's two parts, anti-stenai. And this Greek word, it's got anti, which we just mentioned, and histani, meaning to stand, which can mean opposite or against, to prevent it. So on that meaning, it could be that Jesus is saying, if something negative happens to you, don't anti-stenai it or stand against it. However, when you see the three examples in cultural context, they don't mean that. They're actually the opposite of that. They're kind of in opposition, but they're creative. They're courageous. There's a bold twist on what it means to oppose something. There are many scholars who think that this is a pun by Jesus, where the anti is being used to say, don't stand against someone else in a way that matches what they've done to you. So an eye in place of an eye, a tooth in place of a tooth is saying, don't let your standing against match how the other person is standing against you. So still stand, yes. And it's saying respond, but in the same way, not in the same way, use a different posture. So then Jesus says, don't resist in kind. He's saying stand in a way that you don't treat them the way that they're treating you. I love how Jesus starts where we often can get stuck, which is like on the injury part, when he says eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth, but then he actually moves that conversation forward with his examples and brings it into relationship on a relational level. And then he shares how to stand up. Yet the manner in which you do that, it needs to be different. Don't treat them like your enemy. So what does that look like? Well, let's look at the examples. When understanding the Sermon on the Mount, because it was so foundational in early Christianity, the quotes and the sayings of this idea from Jesus get repeated also in other places in the New Testament. In 1 Thessalonians 5, Paul says, see that no one repays another with evil for evil. And so instead of resist, he says repay. But it's that same word, anti. So standing against someone in the way that they stood against you. In Romans 12, Paul says, bless those who persecute you. Bless and don't curse. Never pay back evil for evil. Do what is right in the eyes of all men. Never take your own vengeance. Leave room for the vengeance of God. So what does it look like to leave space for God to move? To you yourself engage and express some kind of movement that's also creatively allowing Christ to come through your action. The next example, turn the other cheek. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer him the other. Slapping is really not about actually trying to hurt someone really bad. It's insulting. It's highly shaming. And this was a shame-honor culture. This is insulting a person's dignity. So what's the significance in the slap on the right cheek? There are many places throughout Jewish literature, and people seem to agree on this, that actually talk about the significance of the right cheek. Every time it's mentioned, it seems like it's congruent. There's a theologian by the name of Craig Keener, and he's also an expert in Greek and Roman cultural backgrounds. And he quotes, "A backhanded blow to the right cheek did not imply shattered teeth. It was an insult. The severest public affront to a person's dignity. God's prophets sometimes suffered such ill treatment as Jesus would himself. Yet, though this was more an affront to honor, a challenge rather than a physical injury, ancient Near Eastern societies typically provided legal recourse for this offense with lex talionis regulations." So in real, true shame honor societies where your social rank is you and your family's life, it's a severe public offense. So I'm going to invite my friend, Susan, to come up for just a minute. So yeah, I'm right hand dominant, but if I am slapping her on the right cheek, it has to be a backhand slap, which I thought was so interesting. And in that, I'm asserting my dominance. I'm like letting her know that I'm above her. I'm trying my best to strip her of her dignity. Yeah. But then what would be the response to this that Jesus is talking about here? This is crazy, you guys. He's saying, like, don't back down or walk away. Just stand right there and look at this person and offer the other cheek. Well, that's not doing nothing. I don't know. Let's see if we're tracking, though. But what it's doing is it's actually it'd be requiring me to slap her again, but this time with an open palm. And this is to say that we are equals. You are not less than. And it's resisting. It's challenging them in the process. In essence, you're forcing them to reevaluate you. You're not resisting in kind. Jesus is saying, offer the person the opportunity to slap you again, but this time as an equal. That's a trip. Yeah, and it calls into question somebody deeming you lower. It dismantles the way that we seem to categorize, compartmentalize people in a system to make them lower or better or than us. And he's saying, no, we're not doing that. And actually, it's saying like, she's not controlled or defined by my attempt to put her in a social rank. That feels super powerful to me. I don't know what your thoughts are, but that feels powerful. Thank you, Susan. So James Baldwin was a civil rights activist who was known for being a voice for human equality and one of the most influential debaters when it came to race in the United States. He said, "If I'm not who you say I am, then you're not who you think you are. You've been basing who you are on who you say I am. But if I'm not that, then you have to reevaluate who you are." By turning the other cheek, you're saying no, and you're taking your dignity back or maintaining it, and saying that your honor's not based on how somebody else treats you. It's rooted in something deeper. And for a disciple or an apprentice of Jesus, this is the core of knowing our identity in Christ. It's sonship. Man, the civil rights movement is one of the most powerful examples of what Jesus was getting at. Many known and remembered but also lots of unknown. And they took powerful stands against human injustice and racial injustice. There are many accounts, demonstrations, interactions where Black Americans use their voice and their bodies to oppose the hatred in nonviolent ways. In 1965, there was a 5-day march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. And it started with several hundred African Americans. And by the end of it, it was near 25,000 by the time they reached the Capitol. And they were peaceful voting rights marchers. They started their march. And as they were going down this particular bridge, all of a sudden there was unleashed violence by state troopers, by authorities who brutally attacked them during this march. And the level of cruelty that these people showed was massive. They sent dogs to attack the people. There were people on horsemen that had clubs and whips. They had fire hoses, just mauling them with the force of water. And these peaceful marchers, they didn't walk away. They also didn't fight. They just slowly took steps forward, and they didn't stop. It's as if with their bodies, they said, "We have dignity." What a picture of two extremely contrasting approaches. And that type of strength and ability to walk that out and actually endure that, it did not just happen. Every person was a volunteer who was a part of the civil rights movement, and they were trained also in ways to prepare them for this type of intensity. They would have people yelling at them and attacking their dignity, screaming insults. They would stage lunch counters and different social settings throughout the community to prepare them for what this would feel like. And then on top of that, they had to sign a document, and it was like the 10 Commandments, guys. And in it, they said, "I hereby pledge myself and my body to the nonviolent movement. Therefore, I will keep the following 10 commandments." And among those said, "Remember always that the nonviolent movement in Birmingham seeks justice and reconciliation, not victory. That you walk in the manner of love because God is love, and that you be willing to sacrifice your personal wishes in order that all men might be free." And then they had to sign it. "Having seriously considered what I will do, and with the determination and will to persevere." It wasn't a joke. And it requires retraining our instincts, I think. This doesn't come with just no effort. So what does this type of response do for the perpetrator? What a question. This is the 5th of 6 case studies, and it's really no accident that these verses are directly side by side with loving your enemies. Who else is going to be slapping you, suing you, insulting your dignity, but somebody that feels like an enemy? And Jesus is helping us see what not to do, to resist in kind. This kind of response brings change. It dismantles the systems and it flips the script. Step 1 is really naming what's wrong. And then step 2 is moving towards the offender to bid for a different kind of relationship. This means that there's hope for freedom for the perpetrator, that they actually are the least free. So the response gives them an opportunity for them to find freedom. How about the next example? Give them your cloak as well. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, give them your coat also, is one way how it's phrased. So it's important to know the standard dress at that time. It was a set of 2 pieces that made one garment, and everyone just had one set. So they had their tunic. This was like their undergarment that was next to their skin, like their underwear, kind of. And then they had a cloak. So this was like made of wool. It was valuable. It was very warm. It could weather the elements. It was sturdy. It was very important because it would mostly be cold in the evenings. And so Jesus assumes that this is a legal case where someone is suing you. And what he's appealing to are, again, laws in the Torah that are aimed to prevent exploitation of the poor and day laborers. So if someone owes you money and all they have is their outer cloak, you can take that as a pledge of them paying you back. But if you do that, you have to give the cloak back every single night because it was their blanket. It kept them warm. In Exodus 22, it says, if you ever take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge for their debt, return it to them before the sun sets. So this was their only covering, and it was for their body. The law is talking about suing someone and taking a cloak, but the picture he's painting is somebody taking not your coat, but your shirt. That's kind of weird. Your undergarment, like the person's going to take your undergarment. Who would do that? So whoever's doing this, like whatever is driving them to be motivated to do this, if they're in a space where they feel like this is what they've got to do, then give them your coat too. So Jesus is recommending, this is hilarious, that you end up handing over all of your clothes there in public, which would leave you naked. That's different. But it's a public demonstration where you would probably feel shame, but also you're kind of causing a scene. You're kind of exposing injustice. At the same time, you're drawing attention to what's happening. And it kind of seems like what Jesus is saying is, hey, it's okay to go for a little shock value. If they're going to take your tunic, then kindly go ahead and give them your cloak too. They didn't demand that. The law was about taking a cloak. So then I also wonder if it could be that, like, they're trying to cover up their level of mistreatment, like so nobody else would see because the person would still have their cloak on, but they're just going to take the tunic, you know, but we know, like, and how awkward if it's like wool and all they have is the wool on their body, like, that's just no fun. So, like, see, I didn't take your cloak, but I'll go ahead and take your shirt. So the response here he's talking about is like, hey, if you really want to see me be humiliated, then let's just go ahead and take this all the way. Ooh, what they're doing is wrong. But the legal system does allow them to do this thing. So yet, through the act of generosity, of you giving that to them, you're giving and you're exposing it for what it is. It's brilliant in theory, but I don't think that's easy. To really be in a place where this is your option and this is what you choose to shake things up, and choosing generosity, this is not being a doormat. It is through suffering. So that injustice can be exposed. And it's shown in both of these examples. Standing against in a way so that reconciliation can happen. You're kind of shocking the conscience of the person who's wronging you, which is not doing nothing. But it's not resisting in kind. Respond in a way that you're able, but don't resist in kind. And go the extra mile. This is talking about being forced if you're forced. This is the word engruzi. And Roman soldiers, they were allowed to force imperial subjects to carry their stuff. And they had all kinds of heavy stuff. So you could just be out and about with your family or with somebody, and they could be like, hey, you, hey, carry this for me. And you had to. But they knew that that was kind of abusive. So they did put a limit on it by saying you can only force someone to carry your stuff for 1 mile. And after that mile is done, they are no longer your carrier person, So just imagine how that would feel if that happened to you. Like, it would be humiliating. It would be awful. Whoever forces you to go a mile, go with them too. So this is kind of similar to the example of the cloak. They exert their power by asserting who they are in rank over you. And the moment that that is over, generosity from you can redefine the relationship. So think of moving. Who helps you move? Like your real friends, like the close people, the people that are really in your lives, the real deal. They show up to help you move your stuff. So you're kind of saying, hey, after you're done treating me like a pack animal, it also reflects this posture, bless your enemies. It's like, okay, now that you're done humiliating me, can I help you with this? Like, you obviously need some help here. I'll go with you. And you carry on, and then you begin to relate to their humanity. Like, hey, tell me about, such and such. You're just walking and carrying stuff. It's generosity. But it's not like the previous example was exposing a system. This one is going personal. It's relating to them in a hospitable way that makes space for them. So a caveat to this is there have been lots of people that have been encouraged to remain in unsafe situations and relationships. So just to reiterate, this is not about being with unsafe people. This is not about condoning abuse. That's not actually what this is referring to. But we can't begin to ask, like, what are going to be the moments in my life where I can have bravery and courage to go that extra mile to make an enemy a friend because I know I'm safe and because I know I feel like I can handle that. The assumed context for all of these sayings is a conquered, controlled, ethnic, religious minority group before an imperial power. So in one sense, there's really no hope of changing that kind of system overall. However, there is a way that we can respond that reflects the justice and the generosity of God, that resists and exposes injustice, that can bring a level of change. And that level of real change is relationship. Someone who's been a victim of an abuser over and over, this is not what Jesus is talking about in the same type of context. And we also can't treat it literally, like we can't just directly transfer all of this to 2026. So there is a wisdom to apply here that's important for us to see. It's not okay to let somebody treat you like a doormat, and that equals you turning the other cheek. That doesn't even make sense. But maybe the wisdom here is forgiveness. Could be forgiveness at the heart. It's acknowledging, hey, I could get you back, and maybe I should, but I can forgive you. So what's a creative, nonviolent response to other situations? It could be a letter. Like, there's so much creativity you could do to push back in a nonviolent way that's using your voice, using your power, your body. But I think it's going to be unique for every person and situation. So a helpful question could be, what posture communicates that I'm not going to put up with it, but I'm not going to treat you in kind? So this isn't to humiliate a person. It's to expose and name and show that maybe, eventually, maybe even that perpetrator could come to see that they are trapped. That's loving. That's what love does. And people are made in the image of God, all the dignity that goes with it. So this belief is at the heart of these case studies. We've been highlighting relationships, how anger and resentment can creep in and impact families, siblings, men and women, communities, sexual desire, feeling like we have to manipulate people rather than treating them as worthy of the truth, and a conviction that violent resistance will not solve our deepest problems. Only generosity can. So I'm going to end with this quote. Martin Luther King Jr. He says, "Nonviolence is a powerful and just weapon, which cuts without wounding and ennobles the man who wields it. It's a sword that heals. The ultimate weakness of violent retaliation is that it's a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it through violence. You may murder the liar, but you cannot murder the lie, nor establish the truth. Through violence, you can murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate. Returning evil for evil multiplies evil, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend."